Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this virtual public meeting for the Bureau of Land Management's Gunnison Sage-Grouse Resource Management Plan Amendment and Draft Environmental Impact Statement. My name is Andrew Newman, and I will be serving as the moderator for today's public meeting. Before the presentation starts, we have a few virtual meeting housekeeping items to review. Today's meeting is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be provided on the Project e-Planning website after the meeting. All informational materials presented today will also be available through the Project e-Planning website. Today's meeting will include a presentation by the BLM, giving an overview of the RMP and EIS process, how to navigate and find information in the RMP and draft EIS, how to provide comments to the BLM on the draft EIS document. During the meeting presentation, all participant microphones will be muted and incoming video feeds will remain off. After the conclusion of the presentation, members of the BLM RMP Amendment team will answer questions using the question and answer function of the Zoom webinar application. The Q&A function is located at the bottom of your Zoom webinar application screen. Each presentation slide includes a slide number in the upper right-hand corner. Please refer to this number if you have questions regarding a specific slide during the Q&A session. During the Q&A session, please refrain from using inappropriate language. If you need technical assistance, please place your question or describe the technical issue in the Q&A box, and we will attempt to address the issue. Official comments on the draft RMP amendment and EIS will not be collected at this meeting. Formal comments must be submitted to the BLM online through the Project Planning e-Planning website or in hard copy letters sent via traditional mail. Formal comments must be received by February 6, 2024 to be considered in the RMP EIS process. Closed captioning for today's meeting is also available by selecting the closed caption icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This concludes the housekeeping portion of today's meeting. Today's presentation will include 4 members from the BLM project team. The BLM Colorado State Director, Doug Vilsack, will get things started and provide today's welcome message for the meeting. Following Doug, the BLM lead biologist for the planning effort, Leah Waldner, will provide information on the proposed RMP amendment and environmental impact statement. Following Leah, the BLM's NEPA coordinator, Gina Phillips, will provide information on how to provide comment on the RMP amendment and environmental impact statement. And finally, BLM GIS specialist Greg Goodwin will provide information on how to access and review spatial data for the planning process. Thank you again for attending today's meeting. I would like to introduce our first presenter, BLM Colorado State Director, Doug Vilsack.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon and welcome to our presentation on the recent release of the draft environmental impact statement for the Gunnison Sage-Grouse Resource Management Plan Amendment. I've been involved with efforts to conserve the Gunnison Sage-Grouse for many years, and I've always appreciated engaging with stakeholders from throughout the species' range, including numerous visits to the Gunnison Basin and to satellite population areas. Thank you again for taking your time to engage on this important plan amendment. Today, the BLM is excited to share an overview of how we will work together to promote the recovery of the Gunnison Sage-Grouse by maintaining and enhancing habitat throughout this draft plan amendment for 11 existing resource management plans. This has been a major undertaking by our staff from 2 states, 7 field offices, several national conservation areas, and a national monument. In addition to the hard work of our employees, I want to recognize the efforts of our cooperating agencies from Colorado and Utah, ranging from local and state governments to federal agencies. We also appreciate the opportunity to consult with tribes on this and other planning processes. So please sit back and take in the information provided in the presentation, and following that, we'll be sure to provide an opportunity to ask questions. And now I'll pass it off to Leah Waldner to begin the presentation. Thank you again for coming.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming today. I'm excited to be here virtually after having 2 great public meetings in person last week in Gunnison and also Dove Creek, Colorado. So today's venue will be slightly different as I'll be standing here in front of the computer, but happy to present on this resource management plan amendment and the draft EIS. So over today's meeting, this is what we'll cover, a quick agenda here, go over some background of the planning effort, how to navigate the EIS, briefly cover the purpose and need and decision area affected by this planning effort, And then we'll go over a summary of alternatives, changes to resource uses, and also the schedule, the tentative timeline that's remaining, and how to comment. Finally, we'll have an interactive web map tutorial and leave some time for brief questions and discussions. So first, we're going to cover what is a resource management plan. And as you can see on the left-hand side of your screen here, there's a general process involved with preparing a resource management plan. These are plans that help guide the BLM's management of the public lands and federal minerals. And the environmental impact statement is prepared, and you can see on the left-hand side the process that's involved with that. So we kicked off with the public scoping, and then we currently have the draft EIS out for public comment and review. After that, we'll work to develop proposed RMP and final EIS, and that will be taking into account any comments received by the public and cooperating agencies. And then that will go through a 60-day governor's consistency review period. And keep in mind that that will be 2 governor reviews, both in Utah and Colorado, which will show that this plan could affect. And then finally, we would resolve any protests that are received and review the governor's consistency review, and then issue a final record of decision and approved resource management plan amendment. Within the resource management plans, one of the other items that will be provided within there are to establish the different types of uses and actions that would be allowed or not allowed across the public lands. We also will provide management actions that include sideboards to guide future implementation of conservation efforts for Gunnison Sage-Grouse. Next slide. Thanks. So what is a resource management plan? This slide is going to walk through a couple examples here of what you can see within the resource management plan. And these also tie back to some of the alternatives that are provided within Chapter 2. So you'll see that we have goals, objectives, allocations for allowable resource uses, management actions or direction, and designations that will all be covered within a resource management plan amendment. At the top, we start with goals, and these are just examples of what you'll see both in the draft environmental impact statement within the Chapter 2 alternatives, and also within a final resource management plan. So the goal for this special status species of Gunnison sage-grouse is to promote recovery and resiliency of populations by conserving, enhancing, and restoring the sagebrush ecosystems, which populations depend on, in collaboration with other conservation partners. Objectives are setting those overarching objectives or overarching direction for a particular resource. So in this example, fluid minerals would be to manage, to avoid, minimize, and compensate for disturbance, displacement, or mortality of Gunnison sage-grouse and reduce fragmentation. Allocation level decisions within the RMP are those that are going to explain where areas may be open or closed to a particular resource use. In these 2 examples, we have lands and realty, where we would propose to manage a 1-mile buffer of active and inactive LECs as exclusion areas for rights-of-way. Under the fluid minerals allocation, as an example, we could close areas with no known potential or low potential to fluid mineral leasing. The next level would be management actions. These are setting those sideboards for how we may implement certain management actions under an existing RMP. In the vegetation area, we may require the use of native seeds for restoration based on availability. For recreation, we may say no new recreation facility construction between March 1st through July 15th. So you'll see how those actions are providing that implementation guidance for when BLM may consider doing a site-specific authorization. Finally, we have designations. So these could be designating special recreation management areas, as seen in the first bullet there, or areas of critical environmental concern, which we'll talk about more later in today's presentation. So now that we know what a resource management plan is, we're going to cover a little bit of background on what this resource management plan amendment is covering, which is Gunnison Sage-Grouse. This is a distinct species from greater sage-grouse. It was proposed as a species and recognized as such in 2000. It has since been listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2014. And in 2020, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service released their Final Recovery Plan and Recovery Implementation Strategy for the species. You'll see here on the map on the right-hand side that there are 8 populations for Gunnison sage-grouse. That includes in orange on the left, the Monticello population, which is the only population in Utah. And the remaining 7 populations are scattered throughout Southwest Colorado. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did designate critical habitat within each of the populations except for Poncha Pass, which did not have a critical habitat designation associated with it. The current Gunnison sage-grouse population estimate is roughly 4,300 birds. This 3-year average high male count has been below the long-term trend by 19%, which does indicate a long-term downward trend of the population. The BLM manages approximately 40% of the habitat across both Colorado and Utah. And within the Gunnison Basin, that is where the largest number of breeding birds resides, which is 85%, and approximately 65% of its overall occupied habitat range-wide is within the Gunnison Basin. So to switch gears slightly, we're going to walk through how to navigate the environmental impact statement. This environmental impact statement is composed of 2 volumes, 1 and 2. Within volume 1, you'll find chapters 1 through 4, and this really is the meat of the document and the impact analysis within the first volume. So the executive summary provides a brief overview of the entire environmental impact statement. In chapter 1, this is an introduction where it will go over where the decision area is compared to the overall planning area, in addition to consistency with local land use plans and other resource issues. Chapter 2 provides the alternatives, and this provides alternatives broken out by resource area or use. It also identifies the preferred alternative. In chapter 3, we have the affected environment and environmental consequences. The affected environment is providing those baseline conditions across the range. And so for different resources, there will be a different section providing what those baseline conditions are. And then it will also provide an associated impact analysis addressing any potentially significant issues or those issues necessary to make a reasoned choice between alternatives. Finally, chapter 4 is the consultation and coordination efforts that BLM and others have participated in preparing this environmental impact statement. In volume 2, you will find all the appendices related that have been cited in volume 1. So first, I want to point out that this is not a comprehensive list of appendices. These are just select appendices provided in volume 2. Appendix A is an important appendix because these have all of the maps associated with the alternatives that have been provided in Chapter 2, along with other supporting maps. We also have a detailed no action alternative, which is also known as the current management across the RMPs. That's in another appendix. An additional appendix includes the areas of critical environmental concern report, or the ACEC report, in addition to several other supporting appendices that have been provided for additional information. So to briefly discuss the purpose and need of this planning effort is really to promote the recovery of the threatened Gunnison Sage-Grouse, which has been listed since 2014. The BLM will maintain and enhance habitat while continuing to manage public land wherever possible for multiple use and sustained yield. In addition, we are looking at to align BLM management practices with those in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Final Recovery Plan and the recovery implementation strategy for this species. The need really is to respond to the range-wide downward population trend of this species by reducing threats across the area that may affect occupied or unoccupied habitat. So now that we know what the purpose and need is, we're going to take a closer look at the decision area. So this planning effort considers the occupied and unoccupied habitat as seen on this map. Occupied is shown in orange, unoccupied is shown in the gray areas. It also considers some adjacent non-habitat areas. You can see the planning area covers the 2 states, which are southwestern Colorado and southeastern Utah. It crosses 7 BLM field offices, 3 national conservation areas, and Canyons of the Ancients National Monument. The decision area is represented on this map by the cross hatching, and this is where BLM could apply management decisions across this planning effort. This totals approximately 2.8 million acres of BLM surface and subsurface mineral estate. This would include approximately 660,000 acres of that subsurface mineral estate that is not BLM administered surface. Next slide. This is to give a quick overview of the resource management plans, those 11 resource management plans that are currently in place across the decision area. So as you can see, this includes several plans across Colorado and then 2 plans in Utah. All right, so when we're looking at preparing the resource management plan and deciding where we will make allocation level decisions and provide implementation guidance on management actions, we looked at breaking those down by management areas. And so an important aspect is to recognize that there are 4 management areas that may be referred to across the range of the alternatives. The first one is occupied habitat management areas, which is also like an acronym for OHMA. And these are areas of suitable continuous habitat, which do not have effective barriers to Gunnison sage-grouse movement from known use areas. It's also recognized as where breeding is currently taking place or has known to have previously taken place for the species. Then we have unoccupied habitat management areas. These are the areas of occupied habitat that were these are the areas outside of occupied habitat that were formerly occupied by the species and may still contain some appropriate biological or physical characteristics to assist with recovery. We also have identified through public scoping comments the linkage connectivity areas. We're referring to these as LCMA, or linkage connectivity management areas. And these are areas that have potential regions of connectivity that could facilitate movement between those 8 populations we looked at in the initial map. These areas may offer a heterogeneous landscape within the historical range of Gunnison sage-grouse, and we recognize that they may be composed of isolated patches of land cover types that could be used for movement by Gunnison sage-grouse. The final category is also another management area or zone that came from public scoping comments. This area is referred to as the adjacent non-habitat, and these are represented as buffered areas around occupied and unoccupied habitat management areas. So across the range of alternatives, we've offered an adjacent non-habitat buffer of 4 miles for alternative B, and then a reduced 1 mile adjacent non-habitat buffer under alternative D. Next slide, please. These maps are providing a little perspective on those different management areas. So the large map on the right-hand side with the bright green shading there is showing those linkage connectivity areas that were modeled as part of this planning effort. There's an additional appendix on the information used to create those management areas. And then we have on the left-hand side 2 smaller maps. The top one with the red is showing that 1 mile adjacent non-habitat buffer. And then the bottom map in another shade of bright greenish yellow is showing the adjacent 4 mile buffer for the non-habitat area. Okay, so now that we know what the management areas are, we're going to highlight some of the content and summary themes of the alternatives. So looking at alternative B here, we're really focused on excluding threats within occupied and unoccupied habitat areas, in addition to reducing impacts within that 4 mile adjacent non-habitat buffer and the linkage connectivity areas. This alternative B would exclude livestock grazing within habitat and designate all nominated ACECs, or areas of critical environmental concern, found to meet relevance and importance. In alternative C, no ACECs would be designated, and management actions would not extend beyond occupied and unoccupied habitat. Under alternative D, which has been identified as the preferred alternative, there would be a combination of exclusion and avoidance management actions while minimizing impacts to habitat areas and LECs. Alternative D includes select management actions for a reduced 1 mile adjacent non-habitat buffer and would also consider the linkage connectivity areas. It also proposes to designate a subset of the ACECs, which we will cover in more detail toward the end of the presentation. Finally, alternative E, this alternative established elements of the Candidate Conservation Agreement, or the CCA, which is an agreement applied within the Gunnison Basin and allowed for comparison of those elements to other range-wide alternatives. And as previously mentioned, alternative A is those 11 existing resource management plans. So looking at those management areas across the range of alternatives, this slide is showing how those acreages compare. You'll notice in alternative A, it accounts for slightly less occupied and unoccupied habitat than alternatives B, C, and D, because alternative A is only summarizing the designated critical habitat areas, whereas alternatives B, C, and D are summarizing all potential occupied and unoccupied habitat. Alternative E is showing slightly less occupied and unoccupied habitat because that is only summarizing the acres within the Gunnison Basin. One other takeaway to take from this slide is that you'll notice in alternative C, the linkage and adjacent non-habitat areas are not considered across the range of alternatives. And then there are differences in the acreage amounts within the adjacent non-habitat between alternative B and the reduced acreage in alternative D. All right, so now we're going to do a couple of highlights of management actions that have been provided within the draft EIS. These can be read in detail in Chapter 2 of the alternatives of the draft EIS, which is also the special status species section. So the preferred alternative, alternative D, proposes a disturbance cap on energy and related development and infrastructure of 2% in occupied habitat and 3% in unoccupied habitat. The approach here is similar to that is implemented for greater sage-grouse with their disturbance cap and methodology, which is in both Utah and Colorado, just north of where Gunnison sage-grouse is found. The threshold of 2%, however, is slightly lower than what is recognized currently in Utah and Colorado for greater sage-grouse of 3%. The disturbance caps would apply to anthropogenic disturbances and features such as oil and gas development, roads, utility lines, and gravel pits. Additionally, surface disturbing activities could have a minimum mitigation ratio applied for direct impacts. And you'll see that in the preferred alternative, this ratio would be 4:1. So for every 1 acre disturbed, 4 acres of mitigation minimum required. Finally, we have LEC buffers that have been identified across the range of alternatives. And these various buffers would apply to management actions and some allocation level decisions. Under the preferred alternative, a minimum 1 mile and up to 3 mile LEC buffer could be applied in many scenarios to align with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife recommendations. The LEC buffers, as you see there in the purple box, could apply to linear features, low structures, tall structures such as utility lines, and energy infrastructure to include oil and gas, solar, and wind. So if you remember in the beginning, we talked about what a resource management plan was and all of the components. And these here are showing what some of those allocation level decisions could be in the preferred alternative compared to current allocations across the 11 RMPs. So looking at a couple of examples here, under the preferred alternative, both wind and solar would be excluded across occupied and unoccupied habitat management areas. You'll also see in the lands and realty rights of way, approximately 22% under the preferred alternative would be excluded, and this would include that 1 mile buffer that we previously discussed, would be excluded in occupied habitat management areas from new rights of way. Finally, saleable and leasable minerals, non-energy leasable minerals, would be excluded from occupied habitat management areas, which would be a change from the current allocations. Another allocation level decision as part of this draft EIS is looking at fluid mineral leasing. So for fluid mineral leasing, if you look 2 rows down to the closed to leasing, the preferred alternative is proposing to close no and low potential oil and gas areas to fluid mineral leasing. This would be approximately 84% of the occupied habitat areas across the range and 68% of the unoccupied habitat management areas. The remaining, which is 16 and 32% right below there, would be leasing with no surface occupancy stipulation applied. We're going to take a quick look at what these maps in Appendix A look like. So this is showing the preferred alternative, alternative D, and how the fluid mineral leasing allocation would appear within that map appendix. Similar maps have been provided for each of the resources that we just covered, in addition to other resources within the draft EIS. And with that, I am going to move over to areas of critical environmental concern. And this is going to be presented by my co-lead, Gina Phillips.
All right, thank you, Leah. Thank you for covering so much ground on this planning effort presentation too. So I'm Gina Phillips, as mentioned. I work as a planning and environmental coordinator here at BLM, and I've been participating on this planning effort with a team, and as Leah mentioned, co-lead alongside Leah, who I refer to as our technical expert. Next slide, Andrew. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about ACECs. What are ACECs? Areas of critical environmental concern. So these are areas of public lands where special management is required to protect and prevent damage to an area's values. And essentially, we always talk about this plan amendment is similar to an ACEC process because we are developing special management and actions to conserve and protect Gunnison Sage-Grouse, the listed species, and its habitat. So to be eligible for designation as an ACEC, an area is first nominated, and that nomination can come in either by the public or a member of BLM's interdisciplinary team. The nominations are evaluated against the criteria for both relevance and importance. That's per BLM policy. And then in addition, the area must require that special management to protect and prevent any damage to that important resource. So special management can be applied to protect, and here's some of those values that are listed on the screen. Fish and wildlife resources, important historic, cultural, or scenic values, other natural systems or processes that occur on the landscape also qualify, and even measures to protect life and ensure safety from any of those natural hazards. So again, management prescriptions are developed through the planning process and tailored essentially to protect the important and relevant values of that particular area. Next slide. Thanks, Andrew. So areas of critical environmental concern have definitely been an important resource topic for this planning effort. And this table shows all the ACEC nominations received and considered through this planning process. So since we started through scoping, and that was earlier last year. Some nominations were area-wide. Those ones, of course, covered all habitat for the Gunnison Sage-Grouse, and others are relatively smaller in geographic locations or polygons. So our planning team worked with local field office specialists on the areas to focus within Gunnison Sage-Grouse occupied habitat that could really benefit from that extra layer or additional level of protection, and evaluated the threats beyond the management actions already outlined within the preferred alternative of the big planning effort. So these areas that we really focused in on are the areas of critical environmental concern that would be proposed for designation under the preferred alternative, which, as Leah pointed out, is alternative D. Next slide. Thanks, Andrew. So through this process, as reflected under the preferred, you can see there on the slide, we are proposing to update management in an existing Gunnison Sage-Grouse ACEC. That's the IBA there, also important bird area, as well as 3 others. And then, as mentioned, the preferred alternative would propose to designate 4 new areas of critical environmental concern. And those are specifically for the protection and enhancement of Gunnison Sage-Grouse habitat. That's the relevant and important value of the ACEC. And the areas would be managed to reduce habitat fragmentation and disruption to the species during critical periods, such as lekking and nesting. So that's what the special management is geared towards. So next up, we have an overview of the map of the ACECs under the preferred alternative. 4 new designated ACECs, that's Sapanero Mesa, Sugar Creek, Chance Gulch, and those are all located in the Gunnison Basin. Dry Creek Basin, so to the west, that's located in San Miguel County. The 3 existing ACECs considered that would receive updated management because they also occur in occupied habitat management area are the Gunnison Sage-Grouse ACEC, the important bird area, and that's located and managed out of the Gunnison Gorge National Conservation Area, and then West Antelope Creek ACEC and South Beaver Creek ACEC are in the Gunnison Basin. So through this planning effort, BLM has been and is working with 30 different cooperating agencies, and Doug and Leah mentioned before how important our cooperating agencies are to this planning effort. These agencies, of course, span the 2 states, Colorado and Utah, and input and expertise from our cooperating agencies has definitely been critical to developing a full range of draft alternatives, and will be as we move forward in refining the preferred alternative. So input from cooperators, as well as public comments that we receive, will be key in developing the proposed RMP amendment. In addition, BLM has been engaged with interested tribes through ongoing tribal consultation efforts, of course. So the draft RMP amendment, as we've mentioned here today, is out for the 90-day public comment period until February 6th, 2024. And as part of the next steps, BLM would consider all comments received in preparing the proposed RMP amendment and final environmental impact statement. So that document is anticipated to be released in summer of 2024 with a final record of decision to, we're planning for that document to be issued fall of 2024. So that's next year. So let's talk about comments, how to make yours count. Public involvement is one of the most important components of the NEPA process. We want to hear from you on the available draft that's out there. Your input can help inform the decision-making process. BLM is particularly interested in information concerning the draft alternatives, the adequacy and accuracy of the analysis of the management actions, and any new information that would help the BLM as it develops the final plan amendment. The key to providing substantive comments, so those are comments that are helpful, is to support your comment with rationale, or as Leah puts it, the because statement. A comment that is not substantive or is not helpful would be those that are vague or an unsupported statement. Also, those that have nothing to do with the project area. So it's not helpful to say what you don't like or simply vote for an action or an alternative without saying why. And after you submit your comment, what does BLM and our team do with your comment? So all timely comments will be considered, summarized, and addressed as we work to develop the proposed RMP amendment and final EIS. You can see how BLM considered your comments as part of an appendix that gets attached to the final document at the next phase of the planning process. So again, all timely comments must be received by February 6th, 2024. And there's two ways to submit your comments. BLM's preferred method is online through BLM's e-planning project website, where you can also find all the project information. And we'll look at how to do that next. You could always mail a letter, as Andrew mentioned at the beginning, to the address there on the screen. So next, let's take a closer look at BLM's e-planning site and how to submit your comment there. So just a quick demo on how to participate on this NEPA project through BLM's e-planning website. Typing in the URL address on the screen or scanning the QR code there will take you to the project's homepage. Andrew, can you do me a favor and put the e-planning URL in the chat here for convenience? And once there, you could either click on the green Participate Now link or go directly to the comment submission form. Or you could click on the Documents tab on the left-hand side of the screen. So once you get there, the form will pop up in your comment. Yeah, okay, that's great. So you could click on either link. Andrew, I'm trying to catch up with you. There we go. Okay, so the Documents tab will open the available documents for download. And of course, we want to direct people to the Documents tab because this is where you can find all the information associated with this project. That includes Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the draft RMPA EIS. It's there for viewing or downloading. So you could click here on the Participate Now link. That's the green highlight. Thanks, Andrew. I know you're busy multitasking over there. Next slide too. Okay, so once you click that Participate Now link, the comment form pops up, and you could always type your comment in the comment form directly, or the system allows you to copy and paste from another document, which is pretty handy, right? So you could paste it in that comment block There's even an option to upload supporting information or an entire comment letter as an attachment. Fill in the required information. Of course, we're all used to that on websites that is marked with the red. And if you wanted to add an additional submitter, you could click the Add Plus button. When you have completed the required fields, click the Preview button at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And then finally, you'll see a screen where you'll need to answer yes or no to withhold your personal identifying information from future publications on this project. Then you would click at the bottom right, the submission form should show you your submission ID. And then you'll also have the option of downloading your ID as a PDF by clicking the download button. And then to exit, be sure to click the button at the bottom right. And with this slide, I just wanted to highlight that on ePlanning's home screen in the upper right-hand corner, there is a pre-recorded video on how to participate as well. If you ever wanted to review it, it's there. All right, so that's all I have today, and I'm going to hand it over to Greg Goodwin. He is our project's GIS specialist extraordinaire. He's going to provide an overview and tutorial on a much cooler tool, the interactive web map tool. All right, Greg, you're up.
All right, thank you, Gina. Much appreciated. So yeah, so basically what I'm going to discuss here, or kind of show everyone, is just this interactive map, how to use it, and then also provide some context on how to get to the data, which is publicly available as well. Andrew, next slide. So what you have here, so from the maps page, from the site that Gina just showed us, you have all of these layers or data set or GIS files, whatever you're comfortable with calling them, from the planning area, the decision area that Gina and Leah kind of showed, and then the habitat areas, which has been discussed thoroughly during this presentation. Rangeland management areas, travel and transportation, lands and realty, fluid minerals, leasables, locatables as well. Next slide. In order to actually access the interactive map, you want to click on that top page where it says the Gunnison Sage-Grouse interactive map. Next slide. Then from here, I'm going to go in more detail. I'm going to do a demo after these, after my presentation here. So I kind of wrote up this little disclaimer, so hopefully most of you will read it, and you can't actually get rid of this page until you click I agree and then click OK. Next slide, please. So within this interactive map, I have I'm just gonna kind of go over these different tools that I've set up. A lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. Legend, obviously. So the legend tool in this map, basically any layer that is actually turned on, it's going to show up in the legend. The next tool, which is the layer list, is going to have a complete list of every layer that's in this map, which is kind of nice. You can move stuff around, you can turn stuff off, you can turn stuff on, and you can also kind of change the transparency, which I will show everyone, where you can actually kind of see things underneath, so you can kind of make a distinction on what you're looking at. The next tool, which is the draw tool, it basically, you can, if something is, you have a question about something after reviewing the RMP, and there's something on the map that you have a question about, or that you have a concern about, you can actually draw a symbol, either an arrow, or you can draw a box or a circle or a line, or even just write some text. Next slide, please. And within that, you can actually kind of, which I will show you here in a few. And then I also did an about page, which is kind of goes in a little more detail than the front page that I showed you, of the disclaimer information, how to use the map, with some additional instruction. And then going back to that previous slide where talking about you can draw a box or a square, you can actually you're able to create a map, which I'm going to demo here shortly, which will allow users to be able to submit that to a comment. So it will actually save the map as a PDF or a file, and then you can send that with us if you have additional comments. And then I think and then from there we can look at any issue or any positive comment as well. The next tool is the bookmark, where, so as we've been kind of discussing during this whole presentation, is the population areas. So as you kind of see here in this screenshot that I have here, you can kind of click to each one of these population area that's more that is a concern to each person. So if you're in the Dove Creek area, then you can click on the Dove Creek box that you see there, and then you're able to kind of decipher what concerns you may or may not have. Next slide, please. Next tool is the filter tool, which allows you to zoom into a particular, or only show a particular field office. Then the next is surface management. So if you want to look at only BLM surface or Forest Service or private, then you're able to show that. Next tool would be the management tool. So if you want to confirm that our acre numbers for a population area is a certain number, you can actually calculate those acres yourself. So that's an interesting thing where you can double check our work if you so choose. And then the last thing is the base map gallery. So what that basically means is it is a, so right now I have it as a kind of a terrain topographic map background. And then you could change it to anything you like, from, as you see here, channel territory, colored pencil map, aerial background, whatever your heart desires. And that should be it. Next slide. So I think now I'm going to demo. So Andrew, if you could give me control, much appreciated. So as you see here, I'm now sharing. So I will kind of go through a quick little demo here. So to actually get rid of this pop-up screen when you open up the map. Oh, first thing. I want to provide some information. So if you want to actually download this data set or this GIS file, you can click on this. And then you're able to download our habitat area. Just by clicking this download button, you can read the full details of what this data set includes, if you so choose. And then you can download it as a table, Excel table, CSV, KML. That'll open up into Google Earth, shapefile, and then these are GIS software flat file types. So I just want to provide that context there. So let's go back to the map. So now I click agree, as I kind of discussed earlier, then click OK. So in here you have the legend. So these are all the layers that are currently turned on. So you have your planning area, your state boundaries, your field office boundaries, your habitat area, which I just showed you, our surface management for both Colorado and Utah. And the reason I did that was to, if I had it for both states, the performance was not as great as I wanted it to be. So that's why there's two surface managements for Utah and Colorado. Next is the layer list, as I mentioned before. So you can see here we have the ACEC, alternative D, alternative C, which Gina provided in her presentation, fluid and minerals, and then I can, so if I turn on fluid and minerals D, it's going to match up exactly what she showed earlier, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and then from here you can identify certain ones and see which one it is. So this is the West Antelope ACEC, has the GIS acres, a description. So that's kind of how that works. And then they are filtered out by each alternative, alternative C, alternative B, and then alternative E or A, I'm sorry, which is what is currently designated or currently being managed based off of the RMPs that are currently on the books. Next thing, so here's so I'm gonna click on a fluid minerals B, turn off. Actually, we're going to focus in down over here. Might as well. So then if you want to zoom into a area, and you want to kind of, if you have some sort of questions, say something that's going on to this area right here. So as I kind of showed you before, you can kind of draw like a box or a circle. So we'll do a square, and we'll do a loop. And then I'll just kind of draw that. And then next thing is to be able to draw or to create the map, which is completely automated. I know it's kind of not showing up. Actually, I'm going to go back. Do the change the transparency a little bit. Drawing the box. I don't want to behave, is it? Do an arrow. So you could do something like that. Next is doing the map. So if you do a portrait layout, so portrait is, pretty much straight up, landscape is going across. So if you do a portrait, and then you click print, which basically all it's doing here is clicking, or it's creating the map for you. Usually it takes like a minute or two. Hopefully it doesn't take too long here. Okay, then you're able to just click on this and it should open right up as a PDF file, which you can save. Looks like it didn't show it the way I wanted it to, but that's okay. I think hopefully you get the point. I just wanted to kind of show this to everyone. So the next thing is the filters. So one final thing, the bookmarks. So I kind of want to show this. So if you zoom to layer, you can click on the different population areas. Saleable real quick. So then you can click on the different ones. So the Sims Mesa, Crawford, whichever area is of your interest. Dove Creek, Gunnison, which is obviously the largest, Monticello, Canyon Mesa, Poncho Pass, and San Miguel. Next, I wanted to show off the filters. So if you wanted to only focus on Gunnison Field Office or Tres Rios, then you can do so. And then the other two Utah offices are here as well. Then also by land ownership, by BLM, Bureau of Reclamation, Indian Reservation, National Grasslands, private, state, so on and so forth, and the National Park Service. Then same thing with Utah. As I mentioned before, we have two separate ones, one for Utah and one for Colorado. So same thing here, you can pick whichever area you want to focus on as far as land management is concerned. The final one is if you want to focus in on a township area, and then if you have that from a land legal description, you can just type it in right like it is right there, 43 North 80s, and it'll zoom right to it. Then you just have to move these little filter, just drag that over to the right, and that will work just fine. And that's all I have, unless there was something that anyone wanted to mention. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to stop sharing, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, very much. That was a great demo of the web mapping tool. There's a lot of information up there for folks to sift through. Appreciate that. Well, that concludes the presentation portion of today's virtual meeting. We're now going to open up the meeting for a question and answer session. Please type your questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom webinar application. The Q&A function icon is located at the bottom of your screen. We do have one open question that was posed a little while ago, and I will read that off here and then pass it to Leah to answer. This first question comes from Sue Navy, and Sue asks, what is the relationship of alternative E to alternative D? In other words, would alternative D apply to the Gunnison Basin if alternative E weren't selected? Alternatively, if alternative E were selected, what would become of the other alternatives in other places?
All right, thanks for a good question there, Sue. So as we covered in the presentation, there are those different action alternatives, right? And to refresh everyone's memory, the alternative D was the identified preferred alternative. And then we had alternative E identified as that Gunnison Basin Candidate Conservation Agreement, which meant that alternative E highlighted those components of the Candidate Conservation Agreement that have been in place for the Gunnison Basin population since roughly 2013 at least. And I'm going to use a food analogy here, hoping we can all relate a little bit to food. But when we look at those range of alternatives, the food analogy is comparing those to a potluck or a buffet, right? So it may not necessarily mean that when the proposed alternative is developed, that BLM would select that alternative entirely. So we may not select the entire alternative D as it stands or the entire alternative E as it stands. But what happens when developing the proposed is similar to a potluck or buffet. We may decide to go take a little bit of each item and combine them into a proposed alternative. So when looking at what was provided in alternative E, and to answer the second part of that question, what would happen with the other alternatives if they were selected? Really, what could happen is components of alternative E could be selected and brought in with components of any other alternative, whether it's alternative D or C or D, to prepare that proposed alternative. So it really just provides right now in the draft EIS a comparative impact analysis of the different management actions or elements within each of those alternatives that help inform the decision maker on what could go into the final proposed or record of decision with that. Hopefully that answers that CCA or the alternative E with the candidate conservation agreement question. One other item I'll bring up in relation to that is on the e-planning site. We have posted several newsletters throughout this planning process. Most recently, we have an issue 3 that kind of summarizes where we're at with putting out the draft EIS and the summary of alternatives. And then in addition to that, because the candidate conservation agreement was a very big collaborative effort that has been in place for, gosh, close to a decade now, we have another issue, newsletter 4, that is on the e-planning site, where it walks through some of the elements within alternative E that are specific to the candidate conservation agreement and how those relate to elements in the preferred alternative or differences between those elements. So that might be a good newsletter to check out if you're looking to learn more about the candidate conservation agreement itself in relation to the alternatives.
Great, thanks, Leah. All right, next question comes from Kathy Griffin regarding slide 27. I'm going to pull that one up here. And Kathy's question is regarding ACECs. Could the management and existing ACECs, e.g. Crawford, be revised to be made stronger in a particular area, such as road densities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently under the preferred alternative, alternative D, as Gina explained on this slide, we have those existing ACECs that had existing management for whatever they were specially designated for. So in the first line here, you'll see the Gunnison Sage-Grouse ACEC for the Crawford population was previously designated for Gunnison Sage-Grouse management as an important bird area, which is the IBA. And through the public comment period, you are welcome to submit public comments on revising that particular management within existing ACECs or the other proposed ACECs or nominated ACECs to be made stronger. So to answer Kathy's question, in short, yes, those could be revised through this planning process to make new updated management beyond what has been outlined in alternative D, or for that matter, any of the other alternatives such as alternative B that also outline proposed management for ACEC nominations.
Thank you, Leah, for that. Let's see, we have another question here from Vera Smith. Vera is interested in the disturbance cap allowances and what is the basis for different caps across the alternatives, e.g. 1, 2, and 3%. Two-part question also, given the tenuous and fragmented condition of the satellite populations, does the science support any level of further disturbance for the satellites?
Yeah, so the disturbance cap allowances really, if you're familiar with the sister species of Gunnison sage-grouse, greater sage-grouse, there is a wealth of research and information that goes alongside greater sage-grouse. As part of this planning effort, BLM did rely on some greater sage-grouse research, in addition to other research or conservation plans for Gunnison sage-grouse, such as the range-wide conservation plan for Gunnison sage-grouse. In the greater sage-grouse research, the disturbance caps do vary across the range of the science and across the range of the species. There is not a lot of specific research provided for Gunnison sage-grouse related to disturbance cap allowances. One thought with that could be because there's not a lot of populations, for example, the Gunnison Basin, that have experienced oil and gas disturbances or other energy infrastructure disturbances. So the range of the caps across the alternatives does come from literature that is provided from greater sage-grouse for the most part, along with input from specialists and cooperators. We, of course, are looking for any, through the public comment process, any research that could help further inform those disturbance caps or specifics on what you would like to see within the range of alternatives. But for now, we've provided that range and we're looking for the input on what you would like to see there. In terms of what amount of fragmentation or disturbance the satellite populations could experience, I think that was the other part of the question, could, I guess, handle. The impact analysis does go into some detail of the current estimated disturbances and fragmentations that have taken place across the 8 population and puts those into some perspective across the resources. And you can read more about that in chapter 3 under the affected environment. 2 sections I would focus on would be the special status species section, which provides a recap on those estimates, as well as the mineral section, because of course the disturbance cap is tied to the minerals resource.
Great, thank you, Leah. And thank you, Vera, for your question. Just as a reminder to those attending today's call, you can ask questions through the chat or the Q&A function. It's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Leah, we do have another question here from the audience regarding livestock grazing. The questioner asks, is the livestock grazing exception provided in alternative B really a realistic and tenable option being considered by the BLM?
So to recap, under alternative B for the livestock grazing section, there's actually a sub-alternative. So we have alternative B1, which would exclude livestock grazing across Gunnison sage-grouse habitat areas. And then we have alternative B2, which looks at exclusion of livestock grazing across a important seasonal time frame for Gunnison sage-grouse to include lekking, nesting, and early brood rearing time frame. And you can read about those alternatives under alternative B in more detail in chapter 2 under the livestock grazing management section. The question on whether it is realistic or tenable, that is something that is discussed within the impact analysis, which is in the livestock grazing management section of chapter 3. And again, the BLM's goal with this planning effort is really to look at a full range of alternatives to allow a comparison of what those impacts and management actions could mean for Gunnison sage-grouse conservation. So I would highly recommend taking a look at that particular resource if that's where your interest lies, and you can see the details in chapter 2 and the associated impact analysis of chapter 3.
Great, thank you, Leah. Okay, we have another question here from Mr. Doug Homan. Doug is asking, can the occupied area in Crawford be updated since it still appears to be similar to what he mapped 20 years ago as a local district wildlife manager?
Well, thank you, Doug, for your efforts in Gunnison sage-grouse management from some time ago. The Crawford population habitat management areas, those areas that are used in this planning document, come from both Colorado Parks and Wildlife as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the polygons or the areas that were defined as occupied, those are generally the areas defined as critical habitat by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then in addition to the habitat areas that have the potential or unknown for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. The way that BLM is looking at those areas is we would not be updating those areas as part of this planning effort, but we are looking at them as management zones. So there is some additional detail provided in how we would apply certain management actions or implementation level decisions within those broader habitat management areas or zones in chapter 2 under the special status species section. And that would address anything that could change where a certain action may be implemented within the occupied habitat. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but generally BLM would not be changing those boundaries. That would be something that would be coordinated with the state agencies and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Great, thank you, Leah, for that answer. At the moment, we have no open questions submitted. I'll remind folks that you can submit your questions through the question and answer tool at the bottom of the Zoom webinar screen here. This meeting is scheduled to go till 3:30 today, Mountain Time, so we have at least another 10 or 12 minutes for any other questions. And we'd like to thanks again, everyone, for attending today. Appreciate your attendance and participation. Again, we still have a few more minutes for open questions for the BLM. Let's see, we have a question coming in from Delaney. Delaney is asking, first she says, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and talk through all this. Her question is, do you find the ACECs to be a valuable tool for securing funding to help with Gunnison sage-grouse management projects?
Thanks for the question on the ACECs. So I wouldn't say that ACECs are necessarily a tool for BLM to acquire funding for management of projects. In most cases, actually, Congress designates a funding bill that we use to implement conservation actions and management actions for greater and Gunnison sage-grouse across the West. So I think that the goal with ACECs is to provide that additional level of management that we may be looking to supply within certain populations or certain areas with that meets that relevance and importance criteria. And then, you know, it's up to Congress and budget on what those dollars will go toward in the future once an ACEC is designated or once a resource management plan goes out for implementation and which management actions could go along with that. So I'm not sure I can fully answer that question, but in terms of this plan, it's merely looking at those additional management actions that could be applied within the nominated ACECs.
Thanks, Delaney, for your question, and thank you, Leah, for your answer. I don't see any open questions at the moment, but we'll keep the meeting open for at least another 5 minutes till 3:30 Mountain Time, in case any other questions come in. While we're waiting for any other questions, I'm going to flip back to one of the previous slides just to remind folks of how they can submit comments. And the deadline for submitting the comments is February 6, 2024. The BLM's preferred comment submittal method is online through the e-planning site. You can find that at the link there listed on the screen. Alternatively, hard copy letters can also be submitted via traditional mail to the address there in Montrose, Colorado on the screen. If anybody else has any further questions, please go ahead and enter them into the Q&A function. We're happy to answer them today. All right, for anybody who's joined us late and would still like to ask a question, we still have a couple more minutes while the meeting is open till 3:30 Mountain Time. If you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead and submit it through the Q&A function in the Zoom app. I do appreciate everyone's participation today. Well, Leah, I don't see any further questions and we're approaching 3:30. So I guess I'll just announce last call for questions, at least at this meeting. I will remind everyone that this meeting today was recorded and a recording of the meeting will be provided on the e-planning page for viewing later. If anybody else would like to see it, feel free to share that link with others. Okay. Well, it's now officially 3:30 Mountain Time. I don't see any open questions. Leah, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, I think, the whole BLM team, thanks everyone for attending, and we look forward to reading your comments.
Sounds good. With that, we'll close the meeting, and thanks everyone for your participation and have a great day.